Diff doesn't actually have the centre bit in it. A new noise coming from her engine. It's in bits again, but it's damaged there. You can still hear it. You know, any excuse to take this thing for a rip, right? Excuse my ropey diagram. It's going to be a long procedure, so...
Didn't have the correct timing pin, the wrong side.
Stripped a thread. Yeah, it's really hard to read. A younger pair of eyes to my beautiful girlfriend Kat. You join me here at home where I've been doing some maths. Now, maths isn't one of my strong points. Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes and today I'm heading over to my other garage to work on my favourite car, Esther, the ST170 powered Mk1 Escort. Now with regards to Maud, my Maud Mark II Escort, yesterday I went and picked up another set of half shafts from a company called Escort Tech. It's actually a really decent looking used set of non-RS genuine Ford half shafts, and fingers crossed they'll last a bit longer than the last ones did. We'll have to see. Also yesterday I headed over to Esther's garage to dig out my spare diff because the centre bit of the diff got destroyed when Maud's half shaft snapped, and yeah, my spare diff doesn't actually have the centre bit in it, which is unfortunate. But I put a post out on my Facebook and Instagram stories and I was bombarded with messages, but one of the first people to message me was my friend Matthew, the West London Classic Ford Crew events coordinator, and he said that he's got a centre diff bit for me and he doesn't want anything for it, which is awesome. So massive thanks to you if you're watching, mate. And he's also going to drop it off to Inky's Autos to have it welded up, which was where I was going to be taking my spare one that it turns out I don't have. So massive thanks to Inky and Dean at Inky's Autos as well. Now, while I was over at Esther's garage yesterday, I decided to put Esther's rocker cover back on and, you know, get her engine back together, basically, because I thought when I next check her valve clearances, I want to do it properly. You know, it's supposed to be done with the engine hot, so I thought I'd put everything back together, and then next time I go around there, which was going to be today, which is today, you know, the engine will be fully back together. And then whilst it was back together and I was around there yesterday, I thought, well, I may as well take her for a spin around the block, right? But when I fired her up, I noticed a new noise coming from her engine. So I whipped the rocker cover back off again, and it was instantly apparent what was causing that noise. So the first task today is to rectify the issue that is causing that noise. All right, so Esther is out of her garage and her engine is in bits again. And I've actually got the rocker cover over here on the floor. Now, in the last video that Esther was in, I replaced this fitting because the old one got cross-threaded, and I used one with a bigger thread on the back, and as a result, it's obviously got a bigger nut on the back holding it to the rocker cover. Now, if you saw that video, you'll remember that I had to use a hammer to hammer this baffle plate down after I'd fitted it, because the nut on the back of that fitting was basically fouling on this baffle plate. But the noise I heard yesterday when I tried to start Esther up was this cam lobe here fouling on this baffle plate. You can actually see that it's damaged there. But where my trusty hammer failed, I'm pretty sure that my even more trusty angle grinder will succeed.
With the baffle plate removed, I've gained access to the nut on the back of the breather fitting. And with the fitting and the nut removed, it was time to attack the nut with my angle grinder. And then it was just a case of reassembling the rocker cover and putting Esther's engine back together.
Now's the moment of truth. Let's see if she's going to make that noise like she did yesterday when I try and fire her up. No, I can still hear it. If I undo this bolt, it'll go away. There you go. Got to do it all over again. All right, so once I'd shaved a little bit more off of that nut and put it all back together, the noise was gone. And I know that's an utter bodge, me shaving that nut down. And what I should have done was, when I ruined the fitting, I should have ordered another one, the same size, and then I wouldn't have had to drill out the rocker cover, I wouldn't have had to dig out a nut to go on it. But that day I was expecting to put the car back together that day. I wasn't expecting to leave the car in bits. And then it was only yesterday that I discovered that that nut was fouling or making the baffle plate foul on the cam. So it is what it is. Hindsight's a beautiful thing. Maybe when I get one of my spare rocker covers powder coated, then I'll buy another fitting that was the same size as the one I had before. But you know, she's running now without the noise, so happy days. Now, one thing I forgot to mention about this car, you remember that I recently did a compression test and the reading was stupidly low. You know, it was like 95 or 100 psi across all the cylinders, and loads of you guys have been getting in touch with me about that. A couple of you have said that if it actually was that low, I would notice the engine running poorly, which it doesn't. But I think what's causing the reading to be low is either my very cheap compression tester isn't accurate, or the fact that my compression tester is one of the ones where you hold it in the spark plug hole. The kit I've got is really difficult to actually screw into the spark plug holes on a Z-Tech or an ST170, so I just use the bit in the kit where it's got like a rubber bung on it and you sort of hold it. So it's obviously not going to be creating a seal like a screw-in one would. So, you know, the compression test probably wasn't accurate, and yeah, it's probably running more than 100 psi. Having said that, I think when I tested it before, it was only like 120. Again, with the kit that you hold in the hole, but yeah, I've always found ST170s to read slightly lower. And someone got in touch with me ages ago and said that's something to do with the VVT, and someone actually got in touch with me again recently and said the same thing. I don't know what it is about the VVT that makes the compression test, you know, seem like it's lower, but apparently that's true. I don't know. But yeah, just going to take this thing for a quick rip to warm it up, so that then I can do a proper check on the valve clearances. Obviously, I could have just left it running around the garage to warm it up, but you know, any excuse to take this thing for a rip, right? All right, we are back with a nice warm engine, and I've already gone ahead and removed the rocker cover. I've also removed all the spark plugs because that's going to make the engine turn over easier by hand. Now, thanks to loads of advice from you guys and a bit of research online, I realised that I really wasn't doing the valve clearances properly last time. Massive thanks, as always, to everyone who did get in touch with your advice. So what I now realise is that you need to measure when the lobe of the cam is exactly 180 degrees away from the bucket. Now, the buckets are in sort of this angle, so you want the cam lobe to be pointing up this way. So you're basically measuring, you know, this base circle, yeah, the gap between that and the bucket that's down there. So this time I'm literally going to write every gap. So let's turn the engine over until this lobe here is pointing away from the bucket. So I would say that's roughly right, because the bucket sort of sits in the head at an angle like that. So yeah, we'll just test the gap through here with some feeler gauges. Just had to dig out the message from Andrew Lindley at A.L. Developments, who told me that ideally the gap should be 10 thou on the exhaust and 8 thou on the inlet. And A.L. Developments are, of course, the guys that ported the cylinder head that I've got fitted to Esther, and they even offered to set these clearances for me if I was to post the cylinder head to them. But yeah, I'm going to try and solve this by myself before I start, you know, tearing the cylinder head off. But I will leave A.L. Developments links in the description for any of you guys out there that want to extract more power from your engine. So we're working on the exhaust, so it should be 10 thou. This is a 10 thou feeler gauge I've got here, and yeah, it's very loose. So I'll just try 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and yeah, see which one is a nice tight fit in that gap. All right, so I think I've sussed out that that gap is 17 thou. Yeah, it's actually quite hard to measure these gaps. Let me explain why. Now, at first, I was just going in like this, right? And when I do that, it's measuring at like 14 thou. But then what I realised is I'm not putting the feeler gauges at the same angle as the bucket. Excuse my ropey diagram, that's obviously the cam lobe and that's the bucket. Now, because of the casting of the cylinder head here, where the rocker cover mounts up to, yeah, the feeler gauge was sort of coming in at this angle. And then I realised that that's not going to be accurate. So what I've been trying to do is basically bending the end of this feeler gauge. So, you know, pressing it against the bucket so that it bends like that. So that then the feeler gauge is going in like this, so that the bit that's going in between the gap is actually level with the bucket, which in my mind should be more accurate. I've seen online when people use these feeler gauges that have actually got at the end of them bent, but yeah, mine aren't like that. But yeah, I'm making that first one 17. So that's all the exhausts done. And I make them all 17s and 18s. So they're all 7 or 8 thou too wide, which is loads. Anyway, on with the inlets now. And on this side, the buckets are this way. So I'm making sure that the cam lobe is facing up that way. All right, so I've measured the inlets now and they're all too wide. You know, some 14, which is 6 thou too wide, and then some are just 12, which is 4 thou too wide. But essentially, if I've done the measuring correctly, then the gaps on all of the cam lobes are too wide, which can potentially mean that Esther's valves aren't opening enough when the lobe comes round to actually touch the bucket to open the valves. Now, the way I understand it, on some engines they actually have hydraulic buckets which basically adjust themselves, so as they wear out over time, you know, they just close the gap up automatically. And then some engines have like a shim underneath the bucket, and you basically change those shims for thicker or thinner ones to open or close the gap. But on the ST170s, you actually have to change the buckets themselves. You can basically buy those buckets that are all different thicknesses, and you basically buy whatever buckets you need to get the gaps to be how they should be. So what I need to work out now is how thick the buckets are that are fitted to Esther's engine, which means I've got to take the cams out, so it's a bit of a long procedure, but apparently it's actually written underneath them how thick they are, so I won't have to measure each bucket at least. So yeah, I'm gonna have to start digging more into Esther's engine. The cams have got to come out, which means, you know, the cam belt's got to come off and stuff. Before I do that, I'm going to set this timing back to standard, and then that means that I can use the timing bar in the back of the cams to make sure it's at TDC when I take it apart, and then of course when I put it back together. But yeah, it's going to be a long procedure, so let's cue some music and get it done. With the Allen key bolts loosened on the adjustable vernier pulley, I then set the exhaust cam back to standard and then retightened the Allen key bolts. Next, I set about removing the thread and nut from the block, where I would later need to screw in the timing pin. I then dug out my timing bar and turned the engine over by hand until the bar slipped into the slots on the back of the camshafts, which meant the engine was at TDC. I then realised that I didn't have the correct timing pin for the block with me, but that wasn't essential at this stage. With the timing bar removed from the back of the cams, I wedged the lever bar against the flats on the exhaust cam so that I could crack off the exhaust cam pulley bolt. This is not the way you're supposed to do it, but I couldn't find my big adjustable spanner or any mole grips that were big enough, and I think I actually put the bar on the wrong side, but somehow got away with it. But you definitely want to remove the timing bar before you crack off the cam pulleys. Next, I placed a rag beneath the VVT pulley to catch any oil that spilled out when I removed the bung, and with my big adjustable spanner found, I could use that to hold the inlet cam still whilst I loosened the VVT pulley. And then with the cam belt tensioner loosened, I could pull the belt off of the cam pulleys. Next, I removed all the bolts holding the cam caps in, and after a quick tap, I could pull the caps off and then pull the camshafts themselves out of the engine. Alright, so Esther's engine's looking even more bare now. I've got her camshafts over here, and all the caps that hold the camshafts in are kept in order as they should be. And as you would have just seen, I don't have the correct timing pin here to screw into the block. The kit came with 3 of these and I've only got the 2 that I don't need. But I've got another one of those kits in the garage at home, so yeah, I'll have to just bring that one with me when it comes to putting this thing back together. But yeah, I'm going to run out of time today anyway. I wouldn't have been able to put it back together today. And to be honest, the weather is looking like it might turn. I really hope it doesn't. Another worrying thing I've found is one of the bolts that hold the cams in. It looks like it's stripped a thread out of the cylinder head. And I'm not even sure which bolt hole this came out of, because by the time I'd realised, I just sort of had, you know, a handful of them in my hands. It's definitely in the front half of the engine, either side. So potentially I might need to tap another thread in this cylinder head. Yeah, because I was kind of thinking that maybe this is just like thread lock, but that is metal. Unless, of course, there's enough of that thread left that it won't matter that it strips that little bit. But yeah, when I fitted the cams and put this back together, once I got the cylinder head back from A.L. Developments, I used a torque wrench to do the cams up. I did just use a gun to undo the bolts, but I don't think there's any issue with doing that. But yeah, that might end up biting me in the backside when it comes to putting this thing back together, but we'll wait and see. But what I need to do now is figure out what size these buckets are that are in the engine. I'm going to use a magnet to pull them out, and hopefully there'll be a number on the bottom of them. Yeah, it's really hard to read, but there's definitely a number in there. 11.505, and then it says P317, or is that 503? Yeah, it's really hard to read. But yeah, I'm going to pull them all out, give them all a clean, and then write down all these numbers that's written on them. Hello, into a new day. Now, yesterday when I was trying to read the numbers on the bottom of the buckets, it was starting to get dark. Some of the numbers aren't very clear, and some of them I actually couldn't read at all. So I've come back around the garage today with a younger pair of eyes that belong to my beautiful girlfriend Kat, and I've basically been double checking all the numbers on the bottom of the buckets, and I wanted to see if Kat could see the numbers on the bottom of the buckets that I couldn't see the numbers on. So I've now got what I think is a list of the final numbers, but there were still 3 that we both just couldn't read the numbers on the bottom of. All right, so here's our final list, and you can see that there's 1, 2, and this is the 3rd one that I couldn't read the numbers on the bottom of, and I basically tried to measure those with these measuring calipers, which actually only go down to 1 decimal place, so they're not super accurate. I'll just quickly show you how I measured these, because basically what you're measuring is from this sort of nipple bit in there to the flat. So what you have to do is you have to get something that you're able to, you know, put in there and sit on the top of that little nipple bit, and then basically you put that into your measuring calipers first, and then 0 it, and then you put that in there, and then measure from there to the flat. So I measured those as best as I could, and as I say, it's only down to 1 decimal place. So I've got 11.6, 11.5, and this one we think is 11.6, and I think it may say 11.595 on it, but it's not clear at all. What I've got here are the figures that we read off the back of the buckets that are in my spare ST170 cylinder head. So hopefully I'll be able to switch the buckets around and use the ones that are in my spare cylinder head, and then I might not actually have to buy any new ones to get all these gaps correct. Right, now this thing won't be going back together today. In fact, it won't be going back together in this video, but one thing I did grab from my garage at home today so that I'll be able to put it back together when the time comes is the timing pin that I'll need to screw into the side of the block to make sure the bottom end is at TDC when it comes to putting this thing back together. So I'll put that over here. But yeah, me and Kat have got to get out of here. We actually need to go and get some new tyres for Roger, the plastic Fiesta. But I'm going to take all the figures we've got from the bottom of the buckets home with me and see if I can do a bit of maths and work out whether we are going to be able to get the gaps correct on Esther's engine with all the buckets that I've got. But before we do get out of here, there is one other thing I want to check, which might end up putting a bit of a spanner in the works of getting this thing back together. So yesterday, when I was taking the cams out, I found this bolt with a load of thread on it, which has obviously been stripped out of one of the thread holes. And just now, my beautiful girlfriend has been screwing in some of these cam bolts. Now, when I discovered this bolt, I'd only undone the first 3 caps. So I'm pretty sure that this bolt has come out of one of these bolt holes. So Kat's just threaded these in by hand, and what I'm going to do now is try and torque those bolts up to spec, which is 19 Newton meters, and yeah, hopefully they all do torque up to spec without slipping. Right, so the way you're supposed to do these is do them up to 10 Newton meters and then do 19. 10 first, and we'll go to 19. Alright, so they all seem fine. So either there's enough thread left in there that isn't destroyed, or yeah, I can't see why that bolt would have stripped the thread, but now they're alright. Alright, so I thought I may as well just, you know, check the others as well. And yeah, they all torque up absolutely fine, which is a result. And yeah, I'm going to feel a whole lot better about when it's time to put this thing back together now. Anyway, we need to get out of here and go and get some tyres for Roger. Hello, into a new day, and you join me here at home where I've been doing some maths. Now, maths isn't one of my strong points, so feel free to let me know in the comments if you notice any mistakes in what I've been doing. But essentially, we know that the gaps on Esther's valve clearances are too wide, and we also know how thick the buckets are in her cylinder head. So the next stage is to figure out which buckets I need to fit instead to get the gaps where they should be. So I've written all the data out on this one piece of paper. It does look complicated, but let me explain. So these 2 columns here are Esther's cylinder head, and all these numbers are the sizes of the buckets, right? And this is the spare cylinder head I've got with the sizes written out of the buckets that are fitted to that. Now at the sides here and here, I've written what the current gaps are. So, you know, on the exhaust side, they were all 18 thou and 17 thou. And then over on the inlet side, we had some 13s, some 12s, and some 14s. Now, the first thing worth noting is that the sizes written on the bottom of the buckets are in millimeters, and the gaps that I measured with the feeler gauges were done in thou. Also, the ideal gaps that were told to me by A.L.DEVELOPMENTS were told to me in thou. So before I could do any calculations, I needed to convert the gaps that I measured and the ideal gaps that were given to me by A.L.DEVELOPMENTS. I needed to convert them from thou to millimeters. So, as you can see here on the exhaust side, 10 thou is equal to 0.254 millimeters. 8 thou is equal to 0.2032 millimeters, and over here I've got the conversions from thou to millimeters of all the sizes of the gaps. So yeah, I only needed 12, 13, 14, 17 and 18. So the way I've done the calculation is I've added the size of the bucket to what the gap was that I measured. So then you're getting a total size of the bucket and the gap that we've already got. And then, once I've got that figure, I then subtract from that what the gap should be. And then that will give me the size of the bucket that I need to achieve that gap. Right, the keen-eyed among you will notice that this number has changed. And that's because when I just filmed me showing you the calculation that I made, I noticed that I made a mistake. And I do plan to double check all of these measurements before I even think about ordering any buckets. But, for example, this one at the back, so the bucket in Esther's head currently measures 11.565 millimeters. So we're typing 11.565 millimeters, and then we're going to add the current gap, which is 13 thou, which converts to 0.3302 millimeters. So add 0.3302,
and then we're going to subtract from that what we want the gap to actually be, which on the inlets is 0.2032 millimeters. So subtract 0.2032 millimeters, and that equals 11.692. And that's what I've got there. So that means that if I've done the calculation right, we need to replace this bucket here for one that measures 11.692 millimeters, or as close as possible that we can get to 11.692 millimeters. So what I'm hoping is that I'll be able to use all the buckets that I've got, you know, move them around, and then I might not have to buy any buckets, or I'll probably only have to buy a couple. Because even though all the gaps are too wide, you know, quite considerably too wide, you know, some of these buckets that are not wide enough for some positions in the cylinder head will be wide enough to close the gap on others. See, I kind of wrongly assumed that, you know, when these engines are built in the factory, they all have basically the same size buckets in them, and then, you know, you just have to change them if the cylinder head gets rebuilt or through wear. But, you know, we're dealing with fractions of millimeters, so, you know, there's just all different sized buckets for you to get those gaps to be, you know, precise, because, you know, we are talking about minuscule gaps, you know, and measuring minuscule differences of those gaps. So, yeah, this whole process has been really eye-opening. You know, I like getting stuck into stuff that I don't fully understand. And, yeah, I definitely felt like I've learnt something during this video. Now, obviously, I'm very much looking forward to resolving this and getting Esther back together. Hopefully we'll gain a few horsepower. Yeah, time will tell. But yeah, do let me know in the comments, you know, what you think of what I've done in this video. You know, please do let me know if I've made any mistakes. I will be double checking the maths, so that's something that I'm not fully trusting yet. Now, before I go, I want to send a massive thanks out to Andrew Lindley at A.L. Developments for all your help and advice, and massive thanks to everyone else who has been in touch with advice about the cars lately. All your help is very much appreciated. So that's all I've got for this video. If you did think it was any good, please do give it a thumbs up and a share. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Click subscribe if you're new. Feel free to follow me on Facebook, TikTok and Instagram. Check out my website for merch and parts. Massive thanks to my patrons for your ongoing support. I'll leave all the links to everything in the description as usual, along with my email address for anyone who wants to contact me. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.